All right. Good morning. Good morning. How's everyone doing? Awesome. Happy Palm Sunday, everyone. My name is John Douglas, and as always, it's great to see all of you here and to be worshiping with you. Whether you're here in this room or online, we are glad you're here. If you're new around these parts, or if maybe you've been coming for a while and you're looking for a way to be plugged in, I want to welcome you first of all, but I also would ask that you would fill out a connection card. You'll find those cards in the seat backs in front of you, and by filling that out, you'll let us know a little information about you, and then we'll take that information and we'll work towards getting you plugged in within our body. And if you have any prayer requests, if anybody has any prayer requests, we would love to be praying for you this week, so let us know how we can do that. There's an area on those connection cards for any and all prayer requests. You can fill that out, and then we will be praying for you this week. And if you fill out a card today, you can drop those in the baskets at the back doors, or you can drop them in the main foyer at the connection desk. All right, so Easter is coming up, right? It's almost here, and that's awesome. I can almost taste the jelly beans. We were 1 week out from Easter Sunday, and Believers Chapel has a full slate scheduled for our Easter weekend as we celebrate our risen Savior. We would love to see you back here starting Friday for our Good Friday service, and that is at 7 p.m. And then, of course, on Saturday morning, we have our first annual egg hunt. Saturday at noon, there is a choir practice for anyone who would like to be a part of our Easter choir for the Easter Sunday service. And then, of course, on Sunday morning, we'll have a beautiful time of worship and celebrating of Jesus' resurrection. It's going to be great. I'm looking forward to all of that stuff, and I hope you guys are too. There is a calendar that's available out at the connection desk with all of that information on there, and there's also an invitation that you can give to any friends and family that you might have to invite them to join us next weekend. Also, feel free to post any of that information out on your social media sites, email people, and I do not condone vandalism, but if you want to go and spray paint information about those events out in the community, go ahead and do it. Just tell them if you get caught that Abby Douglas told you to do it. And then make sure to invite whoever caught you next weekend to come back for our services. Now, like I was saying, next week is going to be a great time of ministry and outreach. We've invited Black Fox. We've invited so many people to come onto our campus, and I don't know about all of you, but I'm excited for this opportunity to serve our community and our neighbors and to maybe have some candy and some fun as well. Those are three of my favorite things: Christ, candy, and fun. It's going to be fantastic, and if you haven't yet, we would like to know if you are planning to help us out. We could still use some volunteers, so if you're planning to help, sign up today out of the connection desk. We can still use your help. I repeat, we can still use your help. We're dangerously close to the point where if you're the last one to sign up, you will be a rotten egg. But we ask that you would sign up, okay? And a big thank you goes out to all of the folks who have donated already, who have signed up to help. You guys have blown us away with all of your donations. And I have been told that the amount of candy that we've collected is a lot. It's a lot. Approximately 15,000 pieces of candy have been collected, which is slightly less than the amount that I consume in a given week. But great job, guys. Great job. It's amazing. You've blown us away. And we can't wait for next weekend to come. So sign up today if you're wanting to help us to volunteer, and invite your friends, invite your family if you haven't already, and be in prayer for the event. And we're praying for no rain, okay? Sunshine only is what we would like. Now, expect to hear from us this week about any instructions and scheduling changes that may occur. All right, and for next week's service, this is a plug for the Easter choir. We're going to have an Easter choir up here. It's going to be fantastic. There's going to be lots and lots of fun and singing and celebration, and we want you to be a part of that. So you should definitely join the choir, because we can use basses. We can use baritones. We can use tenors, altos. If you're a soprano like me, we can use you. This is going to be for all ages, all vocal abilities. It applies to everyone. All we ask is that you come for a practice at noon next Saturday. Come to the practice and you're in. All right. So this morning, Joel will be continuing our Easter sermon series entitled Heroes, Cowards, and Crooks, and he'll be looking at the life of Pilate. But first, let's all stand together, and we have got some special guests that will be joining us for worship this morning, so everybody rise, if you would, and let's join together in worship. Thank you.
face the day. And in your presence, all our fears are washed away. Washed away. Come out your way, And how great is our God. Sing with me, how great is our God. And all will see how great is our God. Sing one more time, how great. Oh, how great is our God. Sing with me, how great is our God. And all will see how great is our God. In the splendor of the King, clothed in majesty, let all the earth rejoice, let all the earth rejoice. And he wraps himself in light, and darkness tries to hide, but it trembles at his voice, it trembles at his voice. How great is our God. Sing with me, how great is our God. And all will see how great is our God. Age to age, age to age, he stands, and time is in his hands. The beginning and the end, beginning and the end. Oh, Father, Spirit, Son, the Lion and the Lamb, the Lion and the Lamb. Oh, and how great is our God. Sing with me, how great is our God. And all will see how great is our God. Oh, you're the name
sound of his voice. Seas that are shaken and stirred can be calmed and broken for my regard. And through it all, my eyes are on you. And through it all, it is well. And through it all, my eyes are on you, and it is well with me. Far be it from me to not believe, even when my eyes can't see. And this mountain that's in front of me will be thrown into the midst of the sea. And through it all, my eyes are on you. And through it all, it is well. And through it all, my eyes are on you, and it is well. It is well. So let go, my soul, and trust in him. The waves and wind still know his name. So let go, my soul, and trust in him. The waves and wind still know his name. So let go, my soul, and trust in him. The waves and wind still know his name. The waves and wind still know his name. And it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It
the story of Jesus going to the cross, and everything seems to kind of be hand in hand. And then there's this one character that seems to interrupt the narrative. His name's Barabbas. We don't even know much about him except that he's a murderer, a leader of an insurrection, a rebel. And so in this moment, Pilate thinks, I hold the destinies of these two men in my hand. I know the Jews have a tradition that on a holy day, I will release one of the prisoners on death row. Pilate stands on this audacious stage, who now presents Jesus, Son of the living God, versus Barabbas, the thug and rebel. He says, all right, who do you want? Jesus? What has he done but heal, restore, deliver, set free, open blind eyes, open deaf ears, heal the lame and the leper? What has Jesus done? Who do you want? We want Barabbas. Yeah, give us Barabbas. Give us Barabbas.
All right, good morning. My name, hot mic. Good morning again. My name is Joel. I'm one of the pastors here. Happy Palm Sunday as we drive closer towards Easter and continue in our series called Heroes, Cowards, and Crooks, the Faces of Easter, as we see and meet different people like Barabbas and Pilate. But truly not just meet them, maybe see ourselves, our own faces within that. Trials are an interesting thing for me. Many moons ago, I was a pastor, youth pastor in Chattanooga. And at the same time, I was working on my master's degree at the seminary in Birmingham. And so because I never do anything easy, I was like, yeah, let me work 2.5 hours away from where I go to school. And I'll work at this pretty big youth ministry in church. And so I was constantly going up and down the road from Chattanooga to Birmingham for class, and then Birmingham back to Chattanooga for church and family and home and all of those things. And it was a very exhausting time in my life. And often it made it difficult to accomplish being a good student or being a good student pastor, all right? And one time I was coming back from Birmingham, and it was the night of one of the big football rivalries. It was a Thursday night. The game was so big, they moved it to Thursday because so many people would come. And it was two high schools in my student ministry where like the bulk of our teenagers went. So I was like, I gotta be back. Like that's where everybody's at. I need to be there and kind of go out and do, kind of incarnational ministry. And so I'm zipping up the road from Birmingham back to Chattanooga, and I'm looking at the clock, and I'm like, it's gonna be really tight. Like I might just barely make it. And so I'm coming into town, and when you come up the highway there into Chattanooga, you go across this bridge called the Corridor J Bridge. You go across the Tennessee River, and I am zipping along in a 45, maybe. Might have been 50. I might have been going 70, all right? It was somewhere in there. Between 40 and 70 is kind of what I was going, and I'm zipping along, and sure enough, on the bridge, or right before the bridge, was one of Chattanooga's finest. Lights go on, I'm zipping along, he's a little ways back, and right on the other side of the bridge is a ramp, an off-ramp. And I was like, I bet I can get away. Like I harnessed my inner Bo and Luke Duke. I was like, I can get away. So I went down the off-ramp, I go down, I'm looking in the rearview mirror, I was like, he's not back there. Look at me, breaking the law on my way to go do church work, all makes sense, all right? Hopefully the puzzle of who I am to you is continuing to come together. This guy is a terrible, terrible person, all right? So let's let him preach regularly, all right? So I'm going down, and then sure enough, the lights are still on. He's tracking me. And I'm like, all right, I can turn left. And so I'm starting to work. I'm going to turn left into this neighborhood, and I'm zipping. He keeps following me. Finally, he's right up on me. I'm like, all right, I'm caught. So what does any good Baptist youth minister do? I pulled over in the closest parking lot, which was a liquor store. So here I am, breaking the law, being pulled over by the police, by the fuzz, in the liquor store parking lots, all right? He comes out, and I decide to not go like the innocent route or the like I didn't know. I'm going to go I'm just going to be right in this guy's face about it. How dare he pull me over after tracking me as I tried to evade him? How dare he? He goes, you know how fast you're going? I was like, I don't know. And he goes, where were you going? I was like, I'm going to this football game. I got to go. I need to be there. I'm in a rush. This is part of my job. Like I'm trying to play that at him. And he goes, oh, yeah. He goes, well, that was too fast. And he goes, did you not see me? I go, see what? He goes, it looks like you were trying to get away from me. And I said this from my mouth. I said, it looks like you're trying to make your quota for the month. That's not a good thing to say to police officers. I didn't know it at the time, but he comes back up and he gives me my ticket and tells me to drive safe and then says, don't try to evade the police anymore. And I said, do your job regularly throughout the month and you won't have to get us all on the last day of the month. Again, not a good thing to say. So a few days later, I know that I broke the law. This is my ticket, all right? So I was like, well, I'm going to go ahead and just call the courthouse and pay it over the phone. So I call, my name's Joel Reynolds. I give them the ticket number. And she said, what did you want to do? And I said, well, I'm just going to go ahead and pay the fine. And she goes, no, you need to come into court. I said, I do? For a moving violation? She said, the police officer said on the ticket, wrote it in pen on the ticket, do not settle. That's how guilty I was. That's in how much trouble I was. He said, don't let him pay over the phone. Don't let him do the fine. He needs to come in and face the judge. And why shouldn't I have? I broke the law. I am guilty of treason against the state of Tennessee. And many of you have been there too, all right? Not all of you. Some of you are really good people. And some of you are worse than me, and you've committed treason 1,000,000 times against the state of Tennessee. But we're all guilty of that, aren't we? We've broken the law. We've committed treason. The law of Tennessee says, go this speed. I decided 30 miles an hour was way better to go for me. And I was caught. I was guilty. And I was given no choice but to come before the judge. We've all done it. Some of us more than others. One or two of us maybe not at all. But most of us here have committed treason. But I can say this with 100% certainty. All of us have committed treason when it comes to God's laws. All of us, 100% of us, are guilty when it comes to breaking God's law. And that's why Easter is such a powerful season. This is a time for us to kind of readjust our trajectory, which seems to veer away from God's law, from God's love, from God's will for our lives. And Easter puts us back into a place where we realize, I am a sinner. I am guilty. I have tried to commit treason against God. And I stand before a holy God, a holy judge, who in this season gave his only and holy Son in my place, in your place, in our place. Easter is a reminder for us to go, how did I get so far away so fast? And so today we're going to look at that. We're going to consider Jesus on trial and hopefully walk away with 4 realities. The first one is this. It's the temptation of treason. What draws us to want to go away from God's law. But also to consider the effort behind that, the toil of treason, the work, the effort that goes into breaking God's law. And then I want us all to see the tragedy of treason, what it can really do to our very souls, to our spirits, what it did to Pilate, what it did to Barabbas, what it did to the crowd calling for Jesus' life. to see ourselves as people who have repeatedly committed treason against God, broken his law, seek to do it our own way. And then because this is a place of grace, a day of grace, we serve a God of grace, this is a season of grace, I want us to understand that there is truth over treason. There's truth for us, truth for you and I as we journey through this. So today we're going to look at the trial of Jesus. We're going to look at him being there before Pilate, before an angry crowd, and put side by side with Barabbas. We're going to look at Mark chapter 15 to go through this. So if you want to go there in your Bibles, if you're old school analog, you got a paper Bible in your hand, good for you, good for you. For the rest of you slackers, you can look it up on your phone. And if that's still too hard, I'm going to put it on the screen, all right? I'm going to put it on the screen. But we're going to walk through, there's actually 3 trials that kind of take place. It's hard to see them because this story, these 15-ish verses that we're going to look at, it all kind of is pop, 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 pop. It's very sequential. But there's 3 kind of distinct parts of Jesus being on trial, 3 different trials that are happening as kind of his case being pled before the crowd, before the council, before Pilate. The first trial we find in Mark chapter 15. Let's look at the first couple of verses here together. It says, "And as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and the scribes and the whole council. And they bound Jesus and they led him away and they delivered him over to Pilate. And Pilate asked him, 'Are you the king of the Jews?' And Jesus answered him, 'You have said so.' And the chief priests accused him of many things. And Pilate again asked him, 'Have you no answer to make? See how many charges they bring against you.' But Jesus made no further answer, so that Pilate was amazed." This trial begins, the first trial begins with the whole council. This is the Jewish side of things. There is a Jewish piece happening here and a Roman piece happening here. And Mark says that he was before the whole council. So you're talking priests, you're talking scribes, you're talking elders, those who were knowledgeable of the law, those who were knowledgeable of theology and of religion. And Jesus is before all of those. And this council couldn't convict somebody of a capital crime. That was Rome's responsibility. The Jewish council, the whole council that Mark talks about, they couldn't commit and convict somebody to death. Only Rome could do that. And what makes this situation unique is that the whole council, the Jewish council, was for theological, religious purposes. And they couldn't find anything on Jesus. We've talked about it in this series a little bit, haven't we? They're trying to figure out a way to corner Jesus, a way to back him into the corner of his words and his teaching. They couldn't find one. They couldn't pin anything on him. So they decide to bring Rome into it. And it says that they held counsel. They held consultation. What that means in the Greek is it means they had reached a decision. They had a decision in their mind long before this trial, long before Jesus was bound, long before they went to Pilate. They just knew through their jealousy, through their self-righteousness, through their adherence to the law, but an adherence that was incomplete. In their sinfulness, in their anger, they had already reached a decision. This guy, Jesus, he's got to go. So they held that consultation. They reached that decision. And the crime that they brought against Jesus and what led them to take them to Pilate was treason. Jesus claimed to be the king of the Jews. Rome wouldn't wade into this theological, religious stuff. But somebody saying they are the king instead of Caesar, that they are the king instead of the emperor, well, that's a Rome issue. And that's where the whole council figured out they could get Jesus, that they could pin this on him. And it says that they bound him and they led him away. And the scripture says they delivered him to Pilate. That's important. It's the first of 2 uses in Mark chapter 15 of Jesus being delivered. And the reason that this is important is this is not just procedural. Friends, this is prophetic. Jesus being delivered is an answer to prophecy. It is a fulfillment of prophecy, and it connects what's happening in this trial and the two that come after it. What's happening here with Jesus, it connects to Isaiah 53, which is called the suffering servant. And in Isaiah 53, it talks about the sacrifice, the lamb being delivered for justice. So don't just glaze over that Jesus was delivered to Pilate by the whole council. This isn't procedure. This is prophecy. Prophecy being fulfilled. Whether they realize it or not, and we know that they didn't really realize it, they are fulfilling prophecy. They are bringing the suffering servants closer to sacrifice, closer to death, closer to crucifixion. And Isaiah 53, verse 3 says this, "He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, and as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not." In Luke's gospel and his telling of this story, 3 charges were brought against Jesus. One was subverting the nation. That he was subverting the nation. He was teaching them the wrong things. He was leading them away from Rome and away from Caesar. The other charge that they drummed up against Jesus is that he was opposing payment to Caesar. He didn't want to pay his taxes. I'll commit that treason any chance I get. And finally, that big charge was that he was claiming to be king. The whole council had figured this out and brought it against Jesus. They thought they had heard it in his teachings. They thought they had heard it when they questioned him. And so they bring Jesus in. They're saying, Pilate, representative of Caesar, this guy is committing treason. He is committing insurrection against Rome, against the empire, against Caesar himself. C.F.D. Moll says this, "The irony of this statement is Jesus, who is the King of the Jew in a deeply spiritual sense, had refused, in fact, to lead a political uprising. All these charges brought against him, this isn't what Jesus was about. This isn't what he was about. He didn't want to bring an uprising. He didn't want to lead against Rome. He wanted to change the hearts of humanity. He wanted to bring peace, goodwill, salvation to all. But it lands him in this place before Pilate as the trials begin to unfold. And Pilate seeking the truth. What's going on here? And he says to Jesus, are you this? Are you the King of the Jews? Because if you're the King of the Jews, then you're leading a political uprising. And Jesus just simply says, as you have said, as you've said. You're saying it, Pilate, not me. What Jesus seems to be saying here is, yes, I am the King of the Jews, but in a much fuller, much greater, much different sense than you even realized. And Mark says that Pilate was amazed. Pontius Pilate was amazed. Other translation says that he wondered. He's trying to wrap his mind around who this guy was before him and what he was really about. And it sets the stage for the other trials that are to come here. They happen quick, rapid fire, a lot going on, but they're distinct ones. And it begins with the council bringing Jesus to Pilate. And Pilate asking that question, is this true? Are you the King of the Jews? Are you committing treason like they say you are? Are you an insurrectionist? And Jesus says, as you have said. And that brings us to that second trial. The second trial, as we pick up in verse 6, we see the legal piece is wrapping up and the bargaining piece of the trial begins. It says this, now at the feast, he, that's Pilate, used to release for them one prisoner for whom they asked. And among the rebels in prison who had committed murder in the insurrection, there was a man called Barabbas. And the crowd came up and began to ask Pilate to do as he usually did for them. And he answered them, saying, do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews? For he perceived that it was out of envy that the chief priests had delivered Jesus up. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him released, and instead they asked for Barabbas. And Pilate said to them, then what shall I do with this man you call the King of the Jews? And they cried out, crucify him. Jesus was led to the Praetorium. That's Herod's palace. He was the regional monarch, king, ruler, governor. And Pilate was here taking the space because he outranked Herod. And he was in Jerusalem for the Passover to help keep the peace. That was kind of his role. The Gospels don't give us a whole lot about Pilate. They don't really help us understand him a whole lot. But in Roman antiquity and in their writings, there is description of who he was. Agrippa I wrote to Emperor Caligula that Pilate was inflexible, self-willed, relentless, vindictive, cruel, guilty of repeated executions without trial. We see him a little bit differently here, don't we? Just a little bit. Doesn't really dig into him, but he brings into this inflexibility, this vindictiveness, this cruelty. But he was here in Jerusalem for peace. He was here to keep the peace, but it was falling apart before his very eyes. He's looking out at the crowd who's shouting back at him, shouting at Rome. They're yelling at Rome to kill the traitor, the man who's committed treason in their eyes. The crowd was becoming bloodthirsty. And Jesus wouldn't say anything at all. When you're a parent, you get used to this. I call it the guilty stare. You know that your kid has done something wrong. You know that they got into the snacks or they broke something, or typically like it was in my home, they punched another member of the family, typically a brother or a sister. And you know that's what happened because one kid is crying and one is not. One kid has a red mark on their face and the other doesn't. So I go up to the one who's not crying, who's not beaten and bruised, and I go, "Did you punch your brother?" And they just stare. It's like they hope somehow I stop asking them, or I just forget that they exist, so they just stare. They just kind of look over my shoulder off into the distance, just staring. Did you eat that candy? Did you murder the cat? Did you steal my car keys and drive the car? You're 4. They just stare away, the guilty stare. That's not what Jesus was doing here. Jesus remained silent because these charges were not true for him. Jesus remained quiet because he was the king of the Jews, not in the way that Pilate was asking him, not in the way that the whole council had brought against him. Jesus just stayed quiet because the answer was, yes, I'm the king of the Jews, but it's so much fuller than what you all realize. The servant was there, and they're before him going, "Is this you?" Jesus didn't deny the charges because it wasn't treason that he was committing. He was bringing grace. And it was because he was the king of the Jews. What was happening here was not political, it was spiritual. But no one outside of Jesus could fully grasp that. So what happens when you're a parent and your kid is doing the guilty stare? You know they're guilty. They're not saying it. They're just looking off into the distance, just praying that you forget that they exist, praying that you forget that that's your child. And you still have to feed them, pay for them. Leeches. You go with a different tact. You look at the one who's crying with a bruised and beaten face. Did they punch you? Yes, they punched me. Pilate does a similar thing. Jesus isn't saying anything. What does the crowd have to say about this? It's worked before. It says that Pilate did this regularly. He would give them one who would be released in grace, and the other one would be executed. That's kind of calmed them down before. They're mad at this Jesus. I don't want them to be mad at me. So he says to the crowd, "Who should I release?" And they say, "Barabbas. Release Barabbas." He gives them 2 choices, Barabbas or Jesus. See, now, the interesting thing here is that Barabbas, according to Mark and all of the Gospels, is actually an insurrectionist. Jesus is on trial for committing treason he never committed, and Barabbas is in jail for committing treason. The irony that's happening here it's not just injustice, it's ironic what's going on here. Pilate thought he had it all figured out. Let me bring a guy who's really done something bad. Mark and Luke say he committed murder. Barabbas didn't just lead a riot, just didn't lead an insurrection. He killed people. It's like, surely they're going to want me to execute the murderer. And they continue to say, Jesus, kill Jesus, give us Barabbas. I think it's interesting that Pilate doesn't say, this Barabbas dude's got to go. Because what did Barabbas do? He attacked the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. You couldn't just attack a member of Rome and get away with it. And the story is, the most likely sense is that Barabbas was part of a religious group of zealots that rioted, that began to rebel against Rome, and they killed a Roman citizen or multiple Roman citizens. The Jews probably liked that, but Rome should be like, hold on, you don't do this to a Roman citizen. It is said that through the Pax Romana, if you were simply could say, I am a citizen of Rome, if you could show your paperwork, you could walk from one end of the empire to the other without a finger being laid upon you. Unless you go into Jerusalem and Barabbas is bringing an uprising. Pilate had to know, and it says in the text that he knew this was envy against Jesus, but still they called for Barabbas. He knew it was in jealousy, and they still called for Barabbas. He knew that this wasn't political. There was something religious going on here, and still they called for Barabbas. Release that guy. Release the murderer who committed treason so you can kill the other guy who didn't commit treason. That's what's happening here. Just know that this legal plot would not land on any of the legal dramas that are on TV right now. Turn your television on any time of the day, any channel, and you're going to land on a legal television show, all right? It's just how it is. You're probably going to land on Law and Order. Law and Order has been on television since 1665. They are in their 900th season. All right, and it's in multiple cities now. In no way would the producers and the writers of it be like, you know what would be a good thing to show? You know, because they take real drama, they take real cases. The whole Jesus Barabbas thing, they wouldn't touch it. You know why? Because none of this is legal. None of this makes sense. Judge Judy would not allow this in her court. But here's Pilate. Is it the insurrectionist, the murderer that we release? Or Jesus? And they wanted Jesus. Get that guy. Release Barabbas. Bring the murderer back into our community. Even though no evil had been done. Even though in Luke's gospel, Pilate says this man is innocent. In Matthew's gospel, Pilate had been warned by his wife. Have nothing to do with this Jesus guy. Have nothing to do with it. And those of us who are husbands know, we always listen to our wives. Everything they say makes sense because they say it all day long. The crowd got louder and louder. Crucify him, crucify him, crucify him. And we hit on this, again, not because it's political, but because it's spiritual. There's something happening here deeper than Pilate, deeper than Barabbas, deeper than the council, deeper than the crowd. And that's where Isaiah says in verse 4 of chapter 53, surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. And we get to the third trial. And it all kind of flows out of this desire of the crowd to have Barabbas released and Jesus crucified. In verses 14 and 15, Pilate said to them, why? What evil has Jesus done? But they shouted all the more, crucify him. So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released for them Barabbas. And having scourged Jesus, he, here's the second time, delivered him to be crucified. The prophecy fulfilling, whether Pilate realized it or not, whether the crowd realized it or not, God knew what was happening. And Jesus, as God incarnate, knew what was happening. Pilate ends the questioning. No words from Jesus, lots of words from the crowd, lots of words from the priests, lots of words from the council. Pilate could see that this was no ordinary, scared Jewish peasant in front of him. So he gives into the crowd. Mark says he wants to satisfy him. So he has Jesus scourged. In Jewish law, it was 50 lashes minus 1 for mercy or until you committed and confessed your crime. There was no law like that in Rome. They whipped him until he either confessed or until the punisher decided that's enough. So Jesus was whipped again and again and again and again till skin was shredded and ribboned. Bone, muscle, sinew was shown, became visible. Beaten, whipped, left in ribbons. And then that second time, delivered for punishment, delivering the lamb for the sacrifice. And Isaiah's prophecy continues to unfold. By oppression and judgment, he was taken away. And as for his generation who considered that he was cut out of the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people. Thus, the trial of Jesus is completed. The council had made their decision. Pilate couldn't get anything out of Jesus. He knew that the Jews were up to something, the priests were up to something, but nobody would say anything otherwise. The crowd, bloodthirsty. What do we see in these faces? What do we see in these people? And truly, friends, what do we see in ourselves? Where do we see ourselves in this story, our faces in this? We look first to the crowd. And what we see here is this temptation of treason. It's a very loud place to be when you're in a crowd that's bloodthirsty. I've been in one physical fisticuffs fight in my life. 6th grade. The hallway bathroom. We're on a little break. We go in. There's the line of urinals. There's 4 or 5 of them, and they were all taken. And I'm standing there, and a couple of guys go up to this poor kid named Jason Toney. I don't know why we didn't like him. I liked him. I didn't say it out loud because no one else did, but I didn't think anything wrong with him. But they were like, you know what is a good idea? This is what 6th grade boys do. Let's kick him in the butt while he's going to the bathroom. And I was like, well, I don't want to be kicked in the butt, so let's kick something. So I jumped in. There's like 7 of us kicking Jason Toney in the butt while he's in front of the urinal trying to go to the bathroom. And he turns around. Thankfully, he'd already zipped his pants up. He turns around and he looks at us. He was angry. And I promise you, this is what was going through his head. I never asked him, all right? I just put it together in the context. I think he looked at the 6 or 7 of us who were kicking him in the butt, and he was like, who's the fatty that I can take? Joel Reynolds, all right? Because I was this and this. That's the one I can take. I'll take the weakling. He didn't know he was about to meet my 2 good friends, Mr. Herschel Walker and Vice President Dan Quayle. And he came at me, and we start reining those fists in. Everybody starts shouting, the crowd, bloodthirsty, yelling. Poor Miss Scribola, our gym teacher, God bless that woman. She had to come in the bathroom and like separate us, like yank us out in the halls, and everybody screaming and yelling. I never forget that moment. It was the first and last time I got into a fight. I wound up in the vice principal's office crying. I just was kicking him in the butt. But I had to punch him with Herschel Walker. The crowd does this to us. It's the temptation of treason. We get amped up. We get riled up. No matter what was happening here with this crowd, whether they were being stirred up by the religious leaders, whether they were just kind of in the heat of the moment, whether they didn't realize what was happening, what was at stake, who Jesus was, they still raised their voices and said, crucify him. That's the temptation of treason. And what happens when this comes in is that we have a draw to figure out a way around God's plan, trying to work our way how we want. And the plan was peace. That's what God is after. The plan was peace between God and humanity. Peace on earth, goodwill to men, peace eternal through salvation brought by God. But given the choice between harmony and rage, we're always going to choose rage. Given the choice between peace and treason, our sinful nature chooses to be treasonous. Jesus was not only innocent, he was the embodiment of peace. But yet they raged. They chose treason themselves. Don't believe it? Don't believe that you would do this? Give yourself 10 minutes tomorrow morning going up I-24. Just 10. I don't even think you'll need that much time. Or I'll make it even easier for you. Just give yourself 5 minutes on literally any road in Murfreesboro at any time of the day. You will choose rage. I want to murder people all day long. All day long. I choose rage over harmony. I choose rage over peace. I choose treason over God. We're always looking to move away from those things, around those things. And Isaiah knew it. He said, all we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way. And the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He laid upon the Lamb our rage, our treason, our iniquity. So we can see ourselves in the crowd and that temptation to be treasonous. We look at Barabbas, and what we have in Barabbas here is the toil of treason. Rebellion against God, it's a lot of work. It seems easy, and that's kind of the draw of it, the drug of it is like, it seems easy, but it's a lot of work. A few years ago, we noticed a charge on our Amazon account. It was like $75. I didn't buy anything. Becky didn't buy anything. What is this? And one day, a package arrived. And inside of it, I don't know if any of you have seen the cinematic classic, Pacific Rim, but it has a battle between robots and dinosaurs, fighting robots and dinosaurs. And Luke, my precious middle-born child, who is nothing but peace and tranquility all day long, every day, had ordered one of these toys of $75 and set it to be delivered to the house. See, back in the olden days, if you wanted something, you had to clip a card off of a cereal box. You had to wait until everybody had eaten through the cereal, and then you had to fill it out, and then you had to get a check. I don't know if any of you know what checks are, but old people use them, all right? And you had to put the card with the check, and then you had to put it in an envelope with another envelope. You remember? You had to have a self-addressed stamped envelope and then mail it off. For my son, that's not the case. I want the $75 kaiju. I see it on Amazon. Click. It is purchased and delivered. And I said to him, what was your plan here? Were we not going to notice this really expensive toy that we paid for, but didn't know we had paid for? And he looked at me and he goes, when it came, I was going to get it before you all got home. Which is interesting because he was always home with us. We kind of had to get him home, And he goes, and I was going to open the box and destroy the box so it couldn't be returned and I would get to keep it. That was his plan. It makes sense, right? And it makes sense because when we're in the midst of sin and selfishness, we do all this work to rebel against God, to be treasonous against God. The temptation of treason becomes effort and it becomes toil because we start to move away from God's plan, against God's law. What we have here is a desire to act outside of God's law. And God's law is settled by blood. The Old Testament is splattered in blood. The Old Testament was a bad place if you wanted to be a cow, an ox, a dove, pretty much any animal but a pig, all right? And they were just kind of rejected. Don't be like, I wish I was a lamb in the Old Testament. No, don't do that. You're going to be killed, sucker. It's a tough place to be because of the blood sacrifice. That's how God's law was set. And you're like, hey, Joel, don't worry, man. I'm a new covenant kind of believer. I'm a new covenant person. Oh, so blood doesn't count in the new covenant anymore? Blood doesn't exist there? It's even more necessary in the new covenant. Maybe not with the frequency, but with the totality and the power of the blood that has to be spilt here. Blood has to fall. Sacrifice has to be made. See, in the new covenant, the blood of the lamb that's needed here, when we start to go treasonous, the blood of the lamb that's needed, it was a servant. And the servant was a man. And the servant had a name, and his name was Jesus. Blood had to fall, and it had to be his blood to settle this. There is toil and treason. But there's also toil and salvation. Praise be to God. There's toil and salvation. And Isaiah knows this. He says it in verse 7 of 53. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, like a sheep that is before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. Look with me at Pilate. Pilate is the tragedy of treason. We're tempted to it. We toil in it. We start to do the work. But understand there's a tragedy to it. There's a consequence here. To commit treason, you have to be close enough to rebel. You have to be connected just enough to say, that's not good enough. I know a better way. I am the better way is what we tend to do. That's what Pilate was up to. And that's often where many of us are. You have to be inside enough to fight against it to become treasonous. I wish there was a good way. I wish there was somebody in history who had been traitorous, who had been treasonous, that acted in such a way that we could put a name to it. Oh yeah, we did. It's called Benedict Arnold. Being a Benedict Arnold was the worst when I was a kid. If you ever flipped sides in a gunfight, like a cap gun fight, not a real gun fight. A Nerf gun fight is what it would be today. It's like, you're being a Benedict Arnold. How dare you call me a Benedict Arnold? We put a name to it, people. To be that inside and still say there's a better way. Benedict Arnold was one of the greatest lieutenants in Washington's army, one of his finest generals. He was trusted. He had done heroic acts. Yet at the last second, he flipped sides and sided with Great Britain. In a spiritual sense, being a Benedict Arnold it's called something else. It's called being a Joel Reynolds. Being a fill in the blank with your name. That's the tragedy here. The tragedy is we make a decision to choose something other than God's love. The crowd, they chose their hearts of passion. Barabbas, he chose his acts of strength. Pilate chose his mind of knowledge. And Isaiah speaks to this in verse 9. He says, and they made his grave with the wicked and with a rich man in his death, although he had done no violence and there was no deceit in his mouth. The prophecy says that they made his grave. Barabbas and the crowd and the whole council and the high priests, they made his grave. But let's not just throw them under the bus. I made his grave. We made his grave. You know what the tragedy here is? Is that Pilate was right there. He was so close to Jesus. He could hear his voice when he decided to speak. He could look in his eyes. He could sense the resolve and the conviction in Jesus. He even paused. Pilate paused. He bargained. He found no guilt in Jesus. But he still chose to satisfy the crowd. The crowd still chose to say, crucify him. Barabbas still chose to take his opportunity of freedom. They were all right there with Jesus. They got to be right there. The tragedy is being so close to Jesus, to feel his truth and his love and his grace and decide to do something else or follow someone else. maybe about as close as many of us are today in this room, in this space. Jesus is a part of this story, obviously, part of this. And we see here his truth over treason. The truth and the triumph of Easter is that Jesus was there too. He was willing to take this. He was willing to have those crimes placed on him, insults being thrown at him. Pilate was there, and Barabbas was there, and the crowds in there were so close. But the beauty of Easter is that Jesus was there too. He took their anger. He took their insults. He took their false claims. He heard their treason. But the truth of Easter is that he took our sinfulness. He took our insolence. He heard our idolatry. He saw our selfishness. Why? Because he had a dedication to offer all a choice to experience God's forgiveness. Isaiah says, yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him. You don't really get around that statement, do you? It's like, what was he up to? It's pretty clear. He put on him to grief. When his soul makes an offering for guilt, he sees his offspring. He shall prolong his days, and the will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. And out of the anguish of his soul, the suffering servant, the Lamb of God, Jesus, he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the many, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he's poured out his soul to death, and he was numbered within the transgressions. Yet he bore the sin of many, and he makes intercession for the transgressions. Jesus, it says, died because it was the will of the Lord to make intercession for their transgressions. Not just Pilate, not just Barabbas, you and me and all of us. He did it so he could be the blood sacrifice. He did it so he could be the one that died in our place. And he did it so he could triumph on Resurrection Day. He did it so he could become the Savior of the world. He did it so he could become the judge for all humanity. The judge was put on trial. The judge took the conviction of treason. He took the weight of our iniquity, our sin, our selfishness. He took it so he could become the judge we all need. The day I went to court to settle that ticket, remember, I couldn't pay on the phone. I had to go in. It literally said, do not settle with this guy. He's the worst. I'm sure it probably was in there too. He's awful. You'll hate him. I go and I wait for my moment to be called. And my name gets called, my ticket number gets called, and I walk down in front of the judge. And he leans forward and he looks at me. And he says, hi, Joel. I know you. Oh, yeah. I forgot to tell you, I was in the courtroom of a deacon of my church. He said, this doesn't sound good, does it? I said, no, Judge. He said, not only were you speeding, you decided to try and get away from him, didn't you? I was like, I did, Judge. He said, and, looks here, Joel, you got kind of mouthy with him. Yeah, I did, Judge. I did, sir. I'll never forget what he said. He said, I know you. He said it again. I know you. I know this isn't who you are. I know you're better than this. The students at our church need a better example. Your family needs a better example. The people in our community need to keep you safe. He said, I know you. He said it the third time, I know you. I know you. We choose treason. We choose insurrection. And the miracle of Easter is that Jesus, he knows you. He knows you. He knows what you've committed. He knows what you could commit, but he knows that there's more there. Don't be so close to him today that you hear that and choose something else or walk away. Don't leave this room without talking to somebody about how Jesus knows them. Maybe it's the person who invited you. Maybe it's one of us here on staff. We'll have a prayer time in a little while after service if you want to be prayed for, but any of them would love to talk to you about how Jesus knows them and how Jesus knows you. I don't want you to just hear about the judge who can offer you grace. I want to invite you to know and experience him, to know that he knows you, guilt and all, treason and all. You know what I love most about Jesus? That while we were still sinners, that while we were still treasonous, Jesus Christ died for us. He died for you. Will you pray with me? Father, for who we are, for what we've done, we not only confess, we express our need today. Lord, I pray for those of us who are so close in here to you, but just haven't made that choice, haven't crossed over. We get too caught up in the treason we want to commit or the treason we have committed. I pray for those who are just that close. May today be the day they take that step, a physical and a spiritual one of faith. God, the tragedy here is to hear this, to be around it, to continually come back to it, and yet make no commitment of faith. May today be that day. May this moment be that moment as we go deep into Easter, get closer to the resurrection. And through it, we see what Jesus did for each one of us. And we see it knowing all that we've done to work against it, to move away from it. Let those who are seeking here today know and hear that you love them. You see them. You know them. And you have more for them. And may your grace invade their life in such an amazing way that they can't walk away. They must know more, hear more, find that trusted voice to talk to here, to pray those prayers that need to be prayed. And for each of us who have trusted Jesus as we prepare to leave, God, send us out with this story, this reality that you have saved us in spite of our treason, in spite of our insurrection, in spite of our desire to work against your law. You have saved us, sustained us, made us new creatures. And we get the opportunity again to carry that story, that song, that testimony into this world. For this day, for these people, and for this community of faith, I give thanks and I pray that you do work within us now. In Jesus' name, amen and amen. I want to invite you again, if you need to pray about anything, you need to talk with anybody about anything, come right up here to my left, your right, right up here. We'd love to pray for you. It's going to be a great week as we get closer and closer to Easter. Join us Friday night for Good Friday service. Join us Saturday for breakfast and candy and service to the community, but breakfast and candy. And we'll see you here next Sunday on Resurrection Day. Have a great day. You're released. Goodbye.